the library, and thank you for joining us for today for Nonprofit Fundraising 101. We're so excited to have you here. I now would like to introduce Genevieve Kirk. She is the Executive Director for the Center for Nonprofit Excellence at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. Welcome, Genevieve.
Lauren, and for anyone that's walking in, I see a lot of seats right up here in front if anyone needs an extra seat. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending and making time in your day to be here at this workshop, which is the first in our foundational fundraising series for nonprofits this year. My name is Genevieve Kirk. I'm the Center for Nonprofit Excellence Director at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. And we're so pleased to partner with the Champaign Public Library to bring you this program today. We know that we can't possibly cover everything there is to know about fundraising for nonprofits in one short hour, but we do have additional programs and workshops that we'll be offering later this year through our Center for Nonprofit Excellence. I have some of these brochures in the back. You can pick one up on your way out. We offer an executive director leadership network, board bootcamp trainings, and a whole host of other offerings, including our Community Solutions Incubator for new and emerging nonprofit organizations. Also, if you registered for this event or wrote your email address on the sheet in back, I will be sending the slide deck that Shari's going to be presenting to us today, so you'll get that from me via email tomorrow. Be sure to sign up in back if you would like to get a copy of that. For those of you who learn best with a paper copy, I do have a few hard copies available. Just get my attention when I step down, and I'll bring you a hard copy. And now I would love to introduce you to our guest presenter today. She is a wealth of information and has brought us some excellent content, including our Building Endowment series last fall. Shari Fox is the principal of Fox Philanthropic Advisors, which she founded following a 28-year career leading planned, major, and principal gift programs at large public research universities and local non-for-profit organizations. Most recently, she served as Senior Vice President for Principal Gifts with the University of Illinois Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Shari Fox.
Thank you. Building it up. Well, hello, everyone. Nice to see so many faces, familiar and otherwise, and I can't think of a better way to spend the 83rd day of January than with a number of people making awesome things happen in our community. So thank you for that. I mean, doesn't January 1st feel like 100 years ago already? I don't know. A little sunshine maybe would be a good thing. So today, as Genevieve said, we can't possibly cover everything there is to know about fundraising, nor do I necessarily know everything there is to know about fundraising. But what I do want to do today is really discuss, kind of provide a broad overview of the elements of a fundraising program with a little bit more of a deep dive into fundraising with individuals, which is where my expertise, if I have any, is. All right, so we will get started. So my standard disclaimer, I do not provide tax, financial, insurance, or legal advice. So if you hear anything that moves into that realm, you should certainly consult with your own professional advisors in those areas. So here are my objectives for today. I want to briefly review the philanthropic landscape in the United States so you can see where we are all operating. Then discuss the elements of a comprehensive fundraising program and understand the ways that individuals give to charitable organizations so that then you can consider what the focus should be for your own organization. Okay? I can't promise we'll have time, but is there anything else that you hoped to cover today or would like to hear about? And we'll see if we can work that in. Anything you're not seeing on here? Okay, all right, so let's get started. Maybe. All right, we're gonna start with a little quiz. Want to wake you up after lunch. So, at least I gave you a multiple choice. What do you think was the charitable giving total in the US in 2022? So the last report came out was data for 2022. Was it 750 million, Was it 25 billion? Was it 157 billion? Or was it 499 billion? Any guesses? This does not go on your permanent record. But you're guessing B, so 25 billion, and I think I heard C, 157 billion. The answer is $499 billion. Pretty consistently, so first of all, this tells you that we Americans are a pretty generous bunch, right? Pretty consistently, giving in the US has been about 2% of our gross domestic product. It did decline a little from the year before. It was actually a 3.4% decline, or a decline of 10.5% adjusted for inflation. Okay, because we all know there was a lot of inflation in 2022. But that's still a lot of money. I will say one of the trends we've been noticing for the last few years is that the number of donors has been declining, even as the total amount given has risen most years until last year. And what we're seeing is that there's a greater emphasis on major gifts. So that's a reflection of both greater wealth in the hands of a few and the reality that bringing in greater dollars has always required efforts to do that, okay? We're also learning that some of the traditional fundraising efforts are appealing to fewer people. So I think that gives us all food for thought in how we think about our regular annual appeals and how we're asking people for money. And there's also a growth in some non-traditional giving that's not reflected in the Giving USA report, which is where this comes from. Things like crowdfunding, direct giving to individuals in need, groups that aren't registered charities. If they're not registered charities, then that information gifts to them is not reflected in this report either. And then also money for advocacy that certainly supports the public good, but is also not reflected because it's not a potentially tax-deductible charitable gift. Okay. So, second question on the quiz, maybe. Come on. So which of the following gave the largest portion of that total? Foundations, individuals, or corporations? Ah, you're a smart group. Definitely individuals. So this slide actually comes directly from Giving USA. And you'll see that big slice of 64% coming from individuals. But one of the things I'd point out is this little slot up here that says bequests at 9%. Bequests also come from individuals. So I always say, when I look at this data, okay, 73% of the money given came from individuals. So I emphasize that because I know a lot of your organizations spend a lot of efforts on foundation grants and corporate sponsorships. And I'm not saying that those aren't important. And I also understand the reality of some of the operating needs that lead to those foundation grants. But remember that most of the philanthropy in this country comes from individuals, and making sure that you're not ignoring that for the immediacy of some of these grants is important. Okay. So we're going to move forward from here, but keep in mind if you have questions about some of this data, I'll try to leave some time at the end for that. All right, so now we're going to switch gears and talk about some of the functional aspects of fundraising, or what we in the profession often refer to as development. What all does that entail? How do the pieces fit together? For some reason, throughout this presentation, I decided to use a gardening metaphor, which is really risky for me because I don't garden. So it could get a little corny. So just give me a little grace here, okay? Don't point out my gardening mistakes. You can point out my fundraising mistakes, not my gardening mistakes. All right. So here's a summary of the general fundraising activities in any development program. So I think of them in this garden as the rows in your garden. So many of them have a variety of plants within them. Annual giving, there's a lot of tactics and tools. Special events, I feel like that's one of the most persnickety set of plants to grow. They require a lot of tending, a lot of effort, a lot of time. Yeah, I see the nods of the people who do a lot of events. My hat's off to you. Then as you start moving into things like major gifts and planned gifts, those are very individualized. We'll talk a little bit more about that. What I would say is each of these elements takes dedicated time, and they each have their own body of knowledge. There's a discipline to these. There's some expertise and experience. And one of the steps I'd encourage you to take is, as you look at each of these, determine whether, like for instance, if you're looking at foundation grants, if you're going after a particular grant, is it worth the time and effort for the size of the grant? And that's relative to the funds that you need and to your operations. Do the foundation requirements negate the benefit? Is this the kind of grant that you have to do a lot of reporting for, and you have to develop new ways to track your expenses? And so consider that as well. This is not my area of expertise. I know just enough about foundation grants to know that I would need additional help to work in that area. But there's some good resources like the National Council of Nonprofits, Candid, which was formerly known as GuideStar. They have an online foundation directory. There's an organization called Grantscape. I think that may require a subscription. There's information here at your public library. And there's resources through the Community Foundation. So there's good resources to speak with. Corporate gifts and sponsorships are, remember, a small piece. They're 6% nationally of all the giving. They're usually part of the company's marketing budget. So they're considering, as much as many of them want to help your organizations, but they're considering what kind of visibility they get for their customer base. If they will have visibility with influencers among their customer base, those kinds of things. And then special events, like I said, they're labor intensive. My experience has been, as if they're fundraising events, they are most successful if there is significant volunteer involvement. And one of the suggestions I have, when you are measuring the results of a fundraising event, when you net out all your direct expenses and say this is what we raised, be sure you're factoring in staff time. That's an expense as well. I'm not against special events, but I think they should be used selectively and with a clear understanding of what your objectives are. So that's special events according to Shari. Okay, questions about these? We're going to dig a little bit more into individuals and what considerations go into raising money from individuals. Any questions? All right. So this chart was developed by a friend of mine and colleague named Craig Ruck, who does a lot of training in planned gifts and major gifts nationally. And this is really, again, for individual donors, which is where we're going to spend the majority of the time. So, on the columns are, what are the major ways that donors give? What are the kinds of gifts that individuals give to your organization? So there's annual giving, which really supports your operating budget, right? The annual needs of the organization. Then there's major gifts or special gifts, which support a particular project or need of the organization, right? Really an investment in making something different in terms of making something different happen in terms of impact for your organization and outcomes. And then there's planned giving, which is often for endowment, but not always, but really is that it's a special type of major gift that is structured in a way that's usually part of a donor's estate or financial plan, right? And is often a legacy gift for that donor. What I suggest you pay special attention to, and remember too that you're going to get copies of these slides, is the donor source of funds for the gift. So that first row. And this gives you an idea of where the donor's thinking may be as they consider those different types of gifts. And remember, 73% of all gifts in 2022 came from individuals. So they came through one of these, one or multiple of these avenues, both programs and sources of funds. Okay. Questions about the chart, the information on the chart. Is it useful? Useful way to think about it? Okay. So in annual giving programs, again, this is your, these are just your food for the year in that gardening metaphor. This is to cover your annual operating budget. And up here are some of the most common tactics for raising those annual dollars. So direct mail, which more and more is email, either in addition to or instead of print, right, paper. Events, those can raise money. Personal solicitations, foundation grants, crowdfunding, social media, gifts through your website, maybe commercial partnerships, where you maybe after they recover from Restaurant Week, which, by the way, thank you, Jane DeLuce and Experience Champaign-Urbana, because we are very excited to have Restaurant Week this week. So make sure you go to all the restaurants listed. Sometimes it's an excuse to spend money eating out all week. But after some of those restaurants recover, maybe they would, do something in part. One of them might do something in partnership with your organization, where a portion of sales on a particular day support you. That's what I mean by a commercial partnership or a co-branded item. Those aren't hugely common, but we do see them from time to time. One of the things to put on your calendar is on October 17th. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence at the Community Foundation is sponsoring another program right here with the library on running an annual campaign. And Charla Jolly from the Carle Health Center for Philanthropy is presenting that. And she's much more knowledgeable about annual giving than I am. In addition to raising those annual operating dollars, I think of a good annual giving program as also providing a good foundation for the rest of your development program. It helps you build a donor base. So especially for those of you who are with organizations that are young or just starting or have been focusing entirely on government funding and foundation grants, this is another benefit of an annual giving program. You start to build and grow a donor base. You enhance awareness in the community by getting in front of more individuals who know other people, right? You create ambassadors for your organization, people who know you a little better, who invested in you, and might bring others into the fold. And you're cultivating future volunteers and board members. One of the challenges I see for many of our nonprofits, including ones I've been involved with, is developing and growing a succession plan for your board of directors or board of trustees. So it's a way to start that. And most importantly, it's a tool for enhancing relationships. Let's hear it for enhancing relationships. I love this picture. It's that joy. I think we need to look, tomorrow on the 84th day of January, I think we all need to look at this. So remember that a well-executed annual giving effort is part of building and enhancing relationships. But that takes more than just sending out a solicitation and then sending a receipt or acknowledgement. It takes some time and effort to continue to engage those donors in the work of your organization and help keep them informed and interested. And there's lots of ways to do that. Okay. So thoughts or questions or experiences on annual giving before we move into some information on major giving. You're a quiet group today. Oh, there, thank you. That makes me feel good. So I would bet all of you or most of you, nod or raise your hand. Do you do some regular annual giving work? Yes. How many of you who aren't nodding do solicit foundation grants, write grants? Okay. Okay, that's part of annual giving too. But, okay. All right, do you want to do some annual giving programs? Yeah, got to bring in those operating dollars, right? And some cushion and diversifying your income base. So those of you who don't, where does your revenue come from? Just shout out some.
Special events.
Special events, okay. Is that get you what you need to cover your budget?
It depends on where the event's held and if the U of I's having anything that same day or not.
Okay. So it depends. I will repeat because for the recording, but she said it depends on where the event is held and if the U of I has anything else going on that day. Yes, scheduling in a university town is important. Yes.
We depend on memberships, but that's probably an annual giving as well.
That's a good point. Memberships, which is part of annual giving. It is. There, in many cases, those individuals are making, that is their annual gift, is to join. So membership models are part of that. So thank you for reminding me of that, because I should probably add that the next time we talk about this. It's a type of annual gift. Some organizations that are membership-based also solicit donations from their members in addition to their membership. Okay. May I ask, do people get benefits from being a member?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about major gifts, this next level up in individual giving. So this is, again, talking about where you're raising money for special needs or to build the capacity for your organization to move its work to the next level. So, this can be anything from a capital campaign for building or renovation or remodeling to starting the ability to start a new program, to build an endowment. There's lots of reasons you might be talking to donors about major gifts. So on the white side or the left side of the slide, this is really thinking about what is a major gift and what makes it a major gift, right? Well, that's internally defined by your organization. And the way I think of it is a level that is a gift that is significantly above your average annual gift amount. So for some organizations, that's $25,000. For some organizations, it's $100,000, typically very large ones like universities and major national organizations. For many, it's $10,000. It may be $1,000. But you also need to think about, if you are raising money for a particular purpose, what do you need in order to achieve that purpose, and what does your donor base look like? And that's a whole other discussion about determining. There's a discipline out there to build what's called a gift table, and would tell you how many gifts you need at different levels to reach that goal. And it's okay if that's hard. It's not okay if it's impossible. For the donor, however, a major gift is a stop and think gift, right? It's that gift they don't just make because you do good work and they know it and you asked. They have to consider where it fits in their other expenditures or in their other plans for their wealth and assets and in their other philanthropic interests. Okay, it's not just because their neighbor whom they like and respect asked. They are usually solicited, I'm going to be brave and say always solicited face-to-face. It's not the kind of thing you send something in the mail and ask for. It takes understanding that donor, their involvement or likely interest in your mission and what you're raising money for. And as we saw in that chart a couple of minutes ago, it's usually from wealth, not from income. So people are thinking about taking a portion of their savings, right, of their wealth, and making this gift. Now, it could be, depending on what you're asking for, a larger than typical annual gift, and they may make that from income. But if it's above what they usually give that year significantly, then they're going to be thinking about possibly paying that even over time from their wealth. So it requires a strong case for support. And for those of you I remember seeing, even those of you I may not remember seeing, who were at the endowment building sessions that Genevieve referenced, we talked a lot about case for support, and there was even an opportunity to start working on your case for support. But for somebody to basically invest in what your organization's doing, right? If they're taking some of their wealth, they could invest it for financial return for themselves, or they can invest it in your mission. They're going to want to know why you, why this, and why now. So it's really, what is the need, and what is the evidence of that need? How do you know that this is something that's important in your mission? What would the impact of their gift be? If you achieve this goal, what will be different in terms of outcomes? And how is your organization particularly positioned to achieve that goal, to meet that need? So keeping that in mind as you move into working with individual donors more and looking for these special gifts more is to really be able to articulate that in a conversation as well as on a document. Questions about this? Yes, ma'am.
That statement that you said, I didn't quite capture it all, but I loved it. You said the donors are going to ask, why this, why you? I didn't catch the third one.
Why now? Thank you. Why this, why you, why now? Yep. Thank you. Okay. All right. I always say, major gifts are investments. It's just that the investor is looking for a different kind of return, right? A return in something that's meaningful to them. All right. Other questions? Move on to planned gifts. So planned gifts are extra fertilizer for your garden, right? They're, again, as I've defined planned gifts as a specially structured major gift that is part of the donor's overall financial and or estate plan. So let me ask you, when you hear planned gift, what do you think?
Monthly donations.
Monthly donation. Okay, that's interesting. Wills. What else? Anything else? So that's interesting. This is one of those where planned is in the eyes and ears and brains of the beholder, right? So monthly donations, I guess that really is, because the donor has to plan for that, right? But planned gifts, as the development and nonprofit industry talks about them, typically what people think of, as I heard wills, people usually think of gifts that come at the donor's death. Primarily bequests, so leaving money in your will or in your trust, making a provision for your organization. Those are the most common types of planned gifts. But planned gifts, as a term used in fundraising, is really gifts that can be structured in a variety of ways, but it's more than just giving cash. So it can be outright gifts of non-cash assets. So that can be appreciated securities is the most common. That's usually thought of more as just a way to make an annual gift or a major gift. It can be gifts of real estate. It can be gifts of collectibles, think art or antique cars, and some of these things are more desirable than others, right? It can be, there are certain kinds of gifts that are structured in a way that provide income for the donor, as well as providing a gift for charity. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on all these techniques because that is more than one session in and of itself. But again, if you can stand it, I will be back on September 18th. Here, I think Genevieve, we're back here for that one, right? Yep. for a session on that's called Introduction to Planned Giving. So we'll spend a little bit more time here. One of the things I would say is your organization may not be ready to get bogged down in worrying about planned gifts, but you should be able to talk about and accept some very basic gifts other than cash. You should be able to accept gifts of securities. Okay. You should be ready to accept bequests and be able to talk about them with your donors. And accepting them is pretty easy, but have a plan in place for, do you accept them and they just go into your operating budget if they're not restricted otherwise? Some donors do restrict gifts for particular use when they're making bequests. And you should be able to understand and talk about qualified charitable distributions from IRAs. Okay? How many of you know about these? Good, several of you. So we're going to discuss that next, and it'll get a little technical, but I promise it's not that hard. And it's important because this is an increasingly popular gift among donors who qualify. Okay. Other general questions about planned gifts or what some of these items are up on this slide before we get into that? Yes, ma'am.
When you're talking about a planned gift, how would you target that? I mean, when you're talking about planned gifts, we know that they're aware, but how would you go out and recruit or try to get a planned gift?
Oh, well, that's great. So the question was, how do you target planned gifts? I guess, who do you talk to and how would you go out and have that conversation? Well, first of all, we'll get into that a little bit more in September where there's more time, but it's a valid question. Usually people who make planned gifts, and if we were to go back to, let me go back to that chart. So you'll see it says your target audience is anyone who might be interested in your cause, was what my friend Craig put on this chart. And I would say that's accurate, but it's hard to know who that is, right? So who I would go out and talk with about it are people who have already shown a significant interest in your organization. They've been donors or members for a long period of time. Somebody who gives every year raises their hand, yep, I'm going to help you get your work done. They're invested. So they might be somebody to talk with about, have you considered providing for us in your estate plan? And because you don't know who those other people are, you want to make that the fact that you welcome and you want people to include your organization in their estate plans, you want that visible. So you want something on your website about it. You want a little blurb in your newsletters sometimes or all the time, or your annual report about that, maybe an occasional social media post, so that these are the decisions, especially when it comes to estate planning. Has the information been there when it's right for the donor? You don't know when they're revising their estate plan. When I worked in university planned giving departments, we used to, we would periodically send out planned gift information, and there was always a response card, so you could ask for more information. It was not unusual to get a response card back from a mailing years ago. And we knew those donors, they thought, I might, so they stuck that in that file that they avoided looking at for years that required them revising their estate plan. For a lot of reasons, right? They don't typically revise it just for a bequest. But does that answer your question? Yeah, good question. All right. Okay, let's go back, find where we were. So let's talk about qualified charitable distributions from IRAs, or what you'll sometimes hear referred to as charitable IRA rollover. So what is it? So, whoops, went backwards one, sorry. Went ahead too far, I should say. So, a qualified charitable distribution provides an opportunity for individuals to make charitable contributions directly from their IRA to qualified charitable organizations. And there are specific types of organizations. Most of yours would qualify. This is available to individuals who are 70 and a half or older at the time they make the gift, and they can transfer up to, it's now $105,000 this year in these kinds of gifts. Recent legislation, it was $100,000 for the last, since 2006, I think, but it now is indexed for inflation. So when they make this contribution, and again, it has to go directly from their IRA to the charity, not to them first, it does not allow a charitable deduction, but it also doesn't create taxable income. Keep in mind that money in an IRA has never been taxed in a traditional IRA, right? You put money in there, you put it in pre-tax, it grows, all the returns in that account you don't pay tax on until you start withdrawing them. So that's why it keeps the money from being taxable to the donor, so it's still tax advantage to them. And it may be applied to their required minimum distribution. So if they are, now the required minimum distribution age has been raised, but if they are required to take a minimum distribution and they don't need that money, so a lot of people, believe it or not, don't need that distribution from their IRA yet to meet their financial needs, and when they take it, it increases their taxable income. Well, if they're a donor to your organization, then maybe instead they'll just give it to you and avoid having it in their taxable income, right? So these are very popular. There's a related concept that also means you should be able to talk to your donors about naming your organization as the beneficiary of their IRA or other retirement plan. And we're going to talk about that next. And then I promise that's as technical as we get. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Shari.
Hi.
I'm curious, in your observation and experience, and particularly in this region, how common is it for QCDs in that, anywhere $50,000 to $100,000 range?
So the question is, in my experience, how common are those gifts in the $50,000 to $100,000 range? In my experience, now keep in mind, I was at universities. They were fairly common, but gifts in smaller amounts were even more common. So, and donors can give, they don't have to give $105,000, right? They can give $5,000 or $1,000. And some would, what I saw as most common was donors who didn't need their required minimum distribution give the amount of their required minimum distribution. Maybe all to the organization I worked for, maybe split among a few. But this is something that the public is hearing about more. They see it in the financial press. Their tax advisors and financial planners, if they're 70 and a half and they're giving money to charity, often recommend it. And I see Allison Winter, who's the president and CEO of the Community Foundation in the back. And Allison, do you want to add anything to that? What have you seen in that regard?
I have seen that when people realize there's a required minimum distribution and they realize there is an advantage to them not taking the hit as income, they are quick to say yes. And who do I talk to make that happen?
Yeah.
So just knowing that it's a possibility opens doors that people, when they come and talk to you initially, might say, well, I don't have $50,000 or $5,000 to pledge every year. Well, sure, because you have a house and you make payments on electricity, whatever. But then they start thinking about all of the assets they have in the umbrella, and the distribution becomes relevant to them because they're coming to a certain age and they need to make plans for that so they don't get taxed.
Right, right. So I will try to repeat that for the recording, sort of. But I think what Allison said was that when donors realize that they have to take a required minimum distribution, and that they're going to be taxed on that, and that they don't need to use that money for themselves. They will, oh yes, I can do that. It gives them the ability to make a gift they might not otherwise make. And as they start thinking about how they plan for their long-term financial well-being, and they plan for their assets over time, these discussions, really writ large, I think, right, become more relevant to them. And that's really the beauty, again, brazenly promoting the planned giving session. But to me, the beauty of talking about planned gifts is it's really relational giving over time. And it's a conversation that helps people think about, if they have the capacity and want to, how are they planning for their wealth to do all kinds of things that are important to them. Maintain your own well-being first. For many people, it's family, of course, second, or maybe entirely. But also, I may be able to do what I want to do for my family and make this possible for something that's important to me.
One question.
Yes, ma'am.
Can RMDs be spread across multiple nonprofits, or do they only get like a one-time thing?
So, good question. Can RMDs be spread around multiple nonprofits? Absolutely, they can be spread around multiple nonprofits. So,
Backing up with RMD, what's that mean?
oh, excellent question. Maybe I didn't say this. RMD is required minimum distribution. So IRAs and any other qualified retirement plans like 401ks, when the owner reaches a certain age, they are required to start taking distributions. Because the idea, what the IRS's plan was by making all that tax deferred is that it's tax deferred, not tax exempt. So that when you're retired, you have to start taking some of that money as income, and then it is taxable as ordinary income. So now, I think this year it's 73 is the new required minimum distribution age, 73, but it was 70 and a half, and it's gone, and if you were already taking required minimum distributions as the age went up, you still have to take them. Fortunately, when the law changed, increasing the age at which you had to start required minimum distributions, they did not increase the minimum age for charitable distribution. So that's a good thing. There are more people who can do them. Okay, yes, sir.
Is there any thought to having Congress make the QCD begin at like age 65 when people retire?
So
not necessarily treat it like an RMD, but still make it a donation that is not taxed.
So the question is there any thought for Congress to lower the minimum age for qualified charitable distributions, not for required minimum distributions, to something like 65, which is a traditional retirement age? The answer is not that I'm aware of. There may be some discussion of those kinds of things in Congress. I don't know, and if anyone else does, please raise your hand. I don't know that has been, let me back up. So in the industry, in the not-for-profit sector, there was lobbying for a long time to get a qualified charitable distribution. I have buttons that go back to like 1995, and the first law that allowed this passed in 2006. So it's been around for a while. There has been some movement, like recent legislation allows you to make gifts lower maximum, but to life income gifts from IRA. So there's been some movement to broaden it a little bit. One of the things we have to remember is that Congress is always balancing encouraging charitable giving with their needs for revenue. So I would think that's always going to be part of that effort. But I have not heard that there's any movement towards anything like that. If anyone else has, let me know. Reasonable question, though. Yes, ma'am.
going to assume that in September you're going to tell us how we can educate our donor base on this?
I might talk about how we can educate our donor base about this, yes. Yep. There's pretty simple ways to do it. There's like 4 talking points that you can put in your publications. And if you want to talk about that afterwards, well, let me know. Okay, going to move forward so that we have time to get through everything. I think we're doing pretty well. So, okay, my last technical slide. So there is a concept in the IRS called income in respect of a decedent, and you don't have to remember the words. But what this says is what income in respect of a decedent is. Here's a definition. It's assets that would have been considered taxable income in the hands of the deceased. Okay, so when somebody dies, that it would be ordinary income if they took it, and it is therefore taxed as ordinary income when it passes to their heirs. So what do you think the most common income in respect of a decedent or IRD asset is? It's our retirement plans, right? That's our income that was never taxed. So when that passes to heirs, it becomes taxable to them. It's income tax to them. So a spouse can roll it over into an IRA and take it over their life expectancy, but a non-spouse heir has to take it and be subject to tax on that within 10 years or less. You can't do it as less, okay? Because of that, if people are charitably inclined and want to leave money to your organization in their estate plans, these are great assets to use because it's the only way that I'm aware of to 100% preserve their value without it being taxed. And all you have to do is fill out a beneficiary designation form, which is mostly online anymore, with the custodian, whichever financial institution holds that IRA account. And then there other assets, most other assets are unlikely to be subject to income tax when they're passed to heirs. So they're more beneficial to your heirs also, right? Because they're going to be able to keep the whole thing. Now, if someone's subject to estate tax, that's a whole different topic, but not many people are subject to estate tax anymore. Questions, thoughts, things I missed? Yes, ma'am.
Can you repeat the difference in terms of outcomes if that type of money is rolled over to the spouse versus rolled over to anyone else?
Okay.
Non-charitable.
Non-charitable. So, and again, I don't give financial advice, so remember that you need to look up all of this information as well. But a spouse inheriting a qualified retirement assets can put that in their own IRA, and then it's subject to the same withdrawal. They can take it over their life expectancy. There's a required minimum distribution there, just as if it were theirs. If it goes to a non-spouse, like a child, that person must take that money within 10 years. So they can spread it out for a period of time of up to 10 years. Okay. So it accelerates the income, which will be taxable to them. Now, it's still net something. I'm not saying they're not getting any money, but they are paying tax on that. Okay. All right. I'm going to quickly, and then try to leave a little time at the end, and I'll be around if there are additional questions. Quick reminder for those of you who are in Endowment 101 or 201, you've got a lot of this information, but individual donors also sometimes give to endowment. And the term endowment is frequently misunderstood. A lot of things are lumped into endowment, like reserves, savings, etc. But a true endowment is one where the original gift is held in perpetuity, it's invested, and only distributions from that can be used annually. And it's referred to as income, but for those of you who might have accounting degrees, it's not necessarily the accounting definition of income. And I think the recordings are probably still available, the other sessions, if you want to go back and look at some of that. And Genevieve can also get you copies of those slides. And only a donor can designate a gift as true endowment, okay? The donor makes a gift and says to be held as endowment. However, organizations often want to build endowment, and they have funds they call endowment, and technically they're quasi-endowments, or you'll hear them referred to sometimes as board endowments. And that's where your board of directors or board of trustees restricts this fund to operate like endowment, okay? So in reality, operates the same way. It's just that the board can also vote to take extra distributions if they need to, or change the character of the fund. It just requires a vote of the board. And there's a last type of endowment that's called term endowment, which operates like an endowment for a period of time. And then at the end of that time, the money can be spent, either all or over a period of time, or it can turn into a quasi-endowment, a more permanent endowment. Okay, so this might be if I've seen organizations do this. Let's say that they want to be able to build a building in a certain number of years. And they want to build up a fund that they can use for some of the groundwork, and I don't mean that in a construction way, but maybe to do a feasibility study about raising money, or to get some initial architecture plans, those kinds of things. And then eventually they will spend that money on the building project itself. It can be because they want to be able to have the flexibility to start some new programs. And so they're building money and setting that aside and investing it for that purpose. And they can use the distributions for some of those expenses in the meantime. All right, that was really quick endowment 101. So when you're raising money from individuals, this is really what the activities look like, and it is a cycle. You know, it's everything from identifying the donor to getting them engaged with the work of your organization, to solicitation. You have to ask, whether you're asking by email or direct mail or face-to-face, you have to ask for the gift. I used to work for a fundraising director who had a sign in his office that said, money isn't given, it's raised. It's a reminder to us to work. You have to steward those relationships, right? You have to show appreciation for those gifts. You have to let donors know how they're making a difference. Recognition is part of that, and that has different levels of importance to different donors. Then you want to renew their support to your organization and keep going. And all organizations need to pay attention to every step in this cycle, but where your organization needs to focus most changes over time, right? But neglecting any of the steps puts your overall fundraising results and perhaps financial viability at risk, which is why it's important to pay attention to all of them. So fundraising requires intentional resource allocation, and it's an important investment by your board. So for those of you who are here, members of the board, it's something to remember. It requires talent, time, so human resources there, supporting systems like, at least some kind of database and record keeping, being able to generate receipts and acknowledgments and reports. So it does require an investment in resources. But again, consider the long-term ROI and the importance of this to your organization's viability. With that, looking at the time, I will ask if there are any questions. Now, quiet group again. Yes, Sarah.
So, in your experience with looking at major gifts, so usually it seems like people like brick and mortar, kick the tires, like a project that they get to see come to fruition, right? And I've heard that it's not, or it's much harder, and to do something like a staff building campaign or an endowment campaign, because it's intangible and it's not kick the tires. You don't get to see the end of it a lot.
Yeah.
So in your experience, is that true, or what do you think?
It's a great question. So Sarah asked if, she said that she's always, that you've heard or your experience has been that major donors like to give to something tangible, to building campaigns, to things they can see the results of, and less to things like building your capacity, which often means being able to hire more staff or build an endowment that helps provide you financial flexibility for the long term. And is that what I have seen? I would say not always. It really depends on that case for support. So it depends a lot. The other thing is that major gifts are individual donor by individual donor. So in my experience, there are those donors who love bricks and mortar, right? They like being able to see it. They might like having their name recognized in something permanent. And there's nothing wrong with that. And for some of you, that you have physical needs, and that's important. But I remember working with a donor who I was working with on a particular, how he was structuring a major gift. Somebody else really had made the case, a faculty member. And it was for a building project. And he said to me as we were talking, he said, Shari, I'm not a building guy. I'm a student guy. And the reason he was giving to that project was because that particular faculty member made the case about why this was, having that building was important for the students' educational experience and success. And so it depends on the donor and how you're making the case, I hate to say that, but for an investment in something that is less tangible. Because the reality is our organizations, right, we need staff, or we need part-timers, or we need consultants, and I'm not talking about me, but you need people to make the work happen. So being able to talk about, and those are recurring expenses, so that's often a good reason to build endowment, right? But if it's to initiate a new program or be able to reach more people, whether that's seniors or children or the hungry, whether it's to be able to preserve lands and make them accessible and enjoyable for our communities, to learn about and preserve our natural spaces. All of that's, it's making the case to someone for whom that's important. That was a long-winded answer, but then, so it's yes and. Sure. Thought I saw another hand. Oh, yeah, okay.
So on the, back to the QCDs.
Okay.
Is that a federal
Yes.
tax shelter but not state? Or it depends on the state?
Well, it wouldn't be part of their income, so it wouldn't be taxable, wouldn't then.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But it is a federal law, so no matter where your donor lives, they can benefit from that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Nope, it's a reasonable question. We don't think tax law every day, so. Any other questions? Great. Well, I appreciate your time. I don't know, Genevieve, did you have any closing remarks? Well, thank you very much for coming and spending part of your day with us, and I hope it was useful. You will get copies of the slides and also a link to the recording if you want to, if you can stand it again or want to share it with any of your friends or colleagues. Thanks a lot.